The land broke people. This one refused. At 5 in the morning, the widow ran after her only horse across Greystone's ridge. Skirts hitched high, boots hammering cracked earth that had already taken too much. Biscuit had smashed the west fence and vanished into the scrub like he knew what was coming. She followed. She rounded the outcrop and stopped. The horse was gone. In the pale dust lay a man, breathing shallow, blood dried in a dark crescent around a wound that smelled of copper and rot. A long blade still sheathed at his hip, 3 carved stones resting against his throat. She had one canteen, the last water from a failing well. She uncapped it anyway, kneeled, lifted his head, and on the wind came the sound of horses, more than one, coming slow from the canyon, unhurried, as if the riders already knew exactly where this ridge would lead them. The land had a way of making people smaller, not Maren Wolfe. Nothing made Maren Wolfe smaller. She stood 6 feet and 8 inches in her worn leather boots, and even the boots looked like they had resigned themselves to the situation. Copper-red hair that hadn't seen a proper comb in 3 days. Hands built like a blacksmith's, wide, calloused. Scarred in the particular way of a person who had spent years in argument, with tools, fence posts, wood, and wire. Hands capable of crushing something in one moment, and in the next, cradling a dying bird with the gentleness that would have surprised the people in town who had decided they already knew what she was. She was the kind of woman who made doorframes feel like an insult. And right now, at 5 in the morning on a Tuesday in late July, she was losing an argument with a horse. The horse's name was Biscuit, which was, in retrospect, a terrible name for an animal that had just decided to break through a fence and vanish into the dry scrubland before the sun had even made up its mind about the day. A dignified horse would not have been named Biscuit. A dignified horse would have stayed in its stall and contemplated the day with appropriate gravity. But Biscuit was not dignified, and neither, at this particular moment, was Maren. She ran after him in the gray pre-dawn light, boots hitting cracked earth, skirts hitched up past her knees because there was no one to see and she had a horse to catch. 6 feet 8 inches of determined widow moving across Greystone Ridge like something the land itself was trying to outpace and failing. Because if she lost Biscuit, she lost everything, not metaphorically, literally. He was her only horse. The wagon needed a horse. The supply run to Callow Crossing needed the wagon. The flour and the salt and the seed corn she couldn't afford but had to buy anyway needed all of the above. The whole precarious structure of her life balanced on one ridiculous animal currently vanishing into the brush, with what she could only interpret as deliberate intention. Biscuit, she said it the way you said a word you regretted choosing. Biscuit, I swear to God, he was already around the west outcrop she followed. Greystone Ridge had been hers for 11 years. Not hers in the way a woman owns a piece of land outright. Free and clear, name on the deed. The full weight of legal right behind her. Hers in the way that matters more and is counted less. She had built it, repaired it, dragged it through 2 droughts, and 1 vicious hailstorm, and a winter that killed 4 of her 8 chickens, and her husband's favorite mule, and very nearly her husband himself, 2 years before the fever. Finally finished the job in February. Aldous Wolfe. She didn't like to think about Aldous much these days, not because she missed him so sharply it hurt. More because she missed him in the complicated way you miss someone who was not quite what you thought he was. 11 years of marriage. 11 years of working this ridge together. Her doing 3/4 of the physical work. Him managing the accounts with those careful, clever hands. Careful. Clever. She'd learned since February exactly what those words meant in Aldous Wolfe's particular case, and the learning had been the kind that didn't go away. But that was for later. That particular reckoning had its own hour, and this was not it. For now there was the horse, the fence, the cracked earth, and the sun just barely cresting the canyon hills in a wash of pale orange that made the dry landscape look momentarily like something worth fighting for. She rounded the outcrop and stopped. She thought he was a pile of gear. At first rolled, blanket, dropped pack, Something a traveler had left behind after deciding they didn't need it anymore. Except it breathed, barely, but it breathed. She moved closer. Cautious. Not panicked. Panic was a luxury for people who had someone else to fall back on, and Marin had learned to operate without it. Just careful. The way you moved toward anything in the scrubland that you couldn't immediately identify, because careless women didn't last long on ridges like this one, and she had been lasting for 11 years. The figure was a man. He was lying on his side, one arm folded beneath him, face half buried in the pale dust, as though the earth had finally decided to claim him for itself. His clothing was leather and woven cloth, not the rough canvas of a settler, not the polished dress of a townsman passing through. Dark stitching, purposeful construction, clothing made by people who understood that survival required particular choices about what you put on your body. A long blade in a sheath at his hip, still there, which told her he hadn't been robbed. Whatever had happened to him wasn't about theft. His shirt was dark. Too dark in one place. Much too dark. The blood had dried around him in a wide, rust-colored crescent pressed into the dust. Old blood and new blood layered together. The wound was on his left side, just below the ribs, deep in the soft territory, where the body kept things it couldn't afford to lose. The kind of deep that had a particular smell to it. Copper and something underneath. Something warm and wrong. Something that meant infection was already working its way through him, with the patient efficiency of something that had all the time in the world. She crouched down. He was young. Early 30s, she guessed, though pain and sun and whatever had brought him to this particular piece of ground made the estimate difficult. A scar ran diagonally from the corner of his jaw down to his throat. Old, silver, well-healed. The kind of scar that belonged to someone who had survived something that should have killed him before. His hair was long and black and loose from whatever had held it, tangled now with dust and blood into something that would take real work to come back from. Around his neck, 3 small carved stones on a braided cord. Each one shaped differently. Each one worn smooth from handling, from years of being touched, from whatever ritual or habit made a man reach for certain things in certain moments. Suvari Nation markings. She knew them. Everybody in Kalukan knew the Suvari Nation markers, carved stones given to scouts and warriors by the council elders, one for each year of proven service. 3 stones meant young but trusted. Trusted enough for solo work. Trusted enough to be sent out alone into difficult territory. Trusted enough to be alone when whatever did this caught up with him. Marin's heart did a complicated thing. Every warning she had ever heard pressed forward at once. From the women in Callow Crossing, who gathered after church and talked with the specific enthusiasm of people who wanted to be frightened by the world rather than responsible for it. From the men in the saloon, who recounted stories with details that grew more dramatic each telling, as if the facts weren't enough and the truth needed assistance. From the circuit preacher, who visited twice yearly and managed to fit resentment of the Suvari people into almost any biblical passage if he tried hard enough, and he always tried hard enough. Dangerous. Unpredictable. Not like us. She had heard all of it. She had also spent 11 years on a ridge a mile outside of town. Alone for most of that time in all the ways that counted, and she knew what it looked like when something was dangerous. This man was not dangerous. This man was dying, not fast. Dying the slow, leaking way that the body tries to resist and eventually cannot. The kind where everything that's left is being spent on the next breath, and the breath after that, and somewhere in the arithmetic of it, a final calculation gets made. She stood up, looked around. The scrubland was empty in every direction. No tracks she could read beyond the scuff of a fall. No sound except the dry wind coming off the canyon walls. And somewhere behind her, the distant sound of Biscuit, finding something interesting to eat and abandoning the escapade. She looked back at the man. She looked at the canteen on her belt, the one she'd filled from the well that morning. The last water she'd drawn before the bucket came up mostly mud, and she'd understood that the drought was no longer a problem she could manage around. She'd been saving it. For the walk back, for the afternoon heat, for the careful rationing she'd been practicing for 3 weeks, while the well level dropped like a slow defeat and the sky remained committed to its cruelty. She uncapped it, crouched back down. She lifted his head. It was heavier than it looked, dense with muscle and bone, and whatever a person carried that had no name, and held the canteen to his lips. His eyes opened, dark eyes, still eyes. The kind that had been watching the world for a long time, and had learned to do it without flinching at what they found. They fixed on her face, all of it, the height, the copper hair, the size of the hand that held his head, and took inventory. No panic, no aggression, not even surprise, which surprised her. Just that measuring quality, steady and precise, the look of someone who assessed situations as a professional habit. She waited, his lips parted. He drank, slowly at first, carefully, as if he wasn't entirely sure his body would cooperate. Then more, then all of it. She set the empty canteen back on her belt. He closed his eyes again, and in the exhale that followed, in that long, slow release of breath, there was something that sounded almost like relief, like a tension finally given permission to ease. Like arriving somewhere after a journey longer than expected. Maren sat back on her heels and thought, well, that's done now. Then she got up and went to get the flatbed. Moving a man who weighed what Dakota Ashcroft weighed was not, technically speaking, a task designed for one person. She managed it anyway, because she was Maren Wolfe. And she had been managing things that were not technically designed for one person for 11 years. And she was not about to stop on account of a man she hadn't met yet. She got the flatbed from the barn. She got the rope she used for fence hauling when the fences needed it, which was often. She applied both to the problem with the same methodical patience she applied to every physical problem. Assess the situation honestly. Position yourself correctly. Use leverage instead of brute force when possible. And when brute force is actually required, apply it without apology. He made a sound twice. Low and involuntary. The sound of pain that slips past self-control without permission. The kind that happens when the body's defenses are already too depleted to perform their usual dignity. Each time it happened, she muttered something low and apologetic that she wasn't sure he could hear. Probably not. Didn't matter. She said it anyway. She didn't bring him to the house. She thought about it, considered the options. Ran through the practical calculus of a man who didn't know her yet. Waking up in an unfamiliar room, in an unfamiliar house. Disoriented and wounded, and possibly scared, possibly dangerous, despite appearances. She decided that the barn, deep shade, clean straw, familiar animal sounds, no one walking past to see, was the more practical choice for everyone involved. She settled him in the corner farthest from the door, where the shadows were deepest and the straw was cleanest, and the sounds of the horses and the tensed chickens and the ordinary morning would give him something to orient to. She packed straw around him, practical as packing a shipment, got the wound uncovered and looked at it properly in the barn's slant, early light. Deep, yes. And infected, yes, already, but not catastrophically. Not yet at the stage where the choices narrowed to one or none. There was still time in it. If she was quick and thorough, she had made a salve once, in her first winter on this ridge, from an old woman 3 ridges over, who had lived long enough to know what the land offered, if you knew how to ask. Yarrow and pine resin and rendered fat and something else the woman had called by a name Maren had never quite been able to spell but could reliably source from the scrubland in August. She had made batches of it every autumn since, because the ridge did not offer the luxury of being without it. She applied it now, layered it carefully into the wound, methodical and thorough, wrapped it with the cleanest cloth she had, which was cleaner than what a man bleeding alone in scrubland deserved and not as clean as she'd have liked. Then she sat outside the barn door with her back against the wall, and stayed there until the heat of the day peaked and began its slow, reluctant decline. He didn't wake that first day. His breathing steadied by noon. She checked it with the regularity of someone monitoring something important that she couldn't afford to lose track of. By evening, the fever was climbing, visible in the flushed quality of his skin and the occasional tremor that moved through him and then passed. Like a wave through something solid, she brought more water from the well. Water she didn't have to spare, which she was aware of, which she chose not to think about too carefully, because the arithmetic of it led somewhere she wasn't ready to go. She sat beside him in the dimming light and watched him breathe, and changed the dressing at sunset when the first wrapping had done what it could, and sat outside again until the stars came up and kept coming. She thought about going to town. She thought about what going to town would look like. Marin Wolf arriving in Callow Crossing to report a wounded Suvari man in her barn. She could see Deputy Garrow's face with its careful, practiced neutrality. She could hear the particular quality of silence that would fall over the general store, the kind that preceded noise rather than following it. She could predict, with the accuracy of someone who had lived in this county for 11 years, every conversation that would happen in every parlor in town by nightfall, and every version of herself she would become in those conversations. She decided not to go to town. She went back to the house, blew out the lantern, lay in the dark and did not sleep. Dawn came gray and then gold. She was already at the barn when the light changed, pushing the door open with one hand, expecting stillness, expecting to spend another day watching and waiting and monitoring the slow work of healing against the faster work of infection. He was gone, not gone, as in absent. Gone as in upright. He was sitting against the barn wall with his back straight, and one hand pressed flat against his side where the wound was, with the jaw-set expression of someone who has decided to do something their body objects to, and is committed to seeing it through. He was trying to stand up. His arms shook. His legs had not agreed to the plan. He was losing the argument badly, but he hadn't stopped making it, which told her something about him. Something about what kind of person thought this was worth attempting before they had the physical resources to succeed. She stepped into the barn. He heard her. His head turned. Those same dark, steady eyes, still carrying that measuring quality despite everything. She looked at him. He looked at her. They were both clearly assessing the same fundamental problem from opposite sides of it. "You're going to open the wound," she said. He didn't answer. He tried again to get his legs under him. "You'll bleed through the wrapping in about 4 minutes," she said. "Then you'll pass out. Then you'll be exactly where you started. Except I'll have used up more of my good cloth." He stopped trying to stand, not because she'd convinced him of anything. She could see that he had simply not been convinced. More because his body made the executive decision that his willpower had been overruled and sat him back down with a firmness that didn't invite debate. "I'm not keeping you here," she said. She moved to check the dressing, not asking permission, just doing it, with the same matter-of-fact efficiency she'd brought to all of it. "You're not my prisoner. You can leave when you can leave. Without dying, within 50 feet of my barn door." She lifted the edge of the wrapping, inspected. The infection was still there, but hadn't deepened overnight, which was the best she'd hoped for. She replaced the wrapping. "The infection is down from yesterday," she said. "The wound is closing. Both are good. You need another 2 days minimum before movement is a reasonable idea. Moving now would undo everything." She sat back on her heels and looked at him directly. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully name. Not hostility. She'd known hostility, and this wasn't it. Not gratitude either, exactly. Something more complicated than either. Something in the territory between recognition and assessment, like a person cataloging unexpected information. "I'm Marin Wolf," she said. "This is Greystone Ridge. You've been here just under a day." A pause that had weight in it. His voice, when it came, was low and rough-edged in the way of someone whose throat had been dry for too long. "Dakota Ashcroft." "All right," she said. "Dakota Ashcroft, 2 more days. Then we'll see." She stood up. He watched her. She went to get the morning water. She almost missed it. She was at the well, cranking the bucket handle, listening to the rope groan against the wooden frame, trying not to calculate too precisely how little was coming up, when she heard the gate. Not the broken west gate that she'd been meaning to fix for a week. The front gate. The real one. With the iron latch she'd replaced herself 2 springs ago. When the old one finally gave out, she looked up. A man stood at the gate and had not tried to open it. He was old, maybe 70, maybe more. He was Suvari. She could read that in his bearing as much as in the carved stones he wore, in the particular stillness of a person who had learned to occupy space deliberately, rather than by default. His clothing was plain and dark and had traveled distances. He carried no weapon she could see. He stood at the gate and waited, which told her something. People who meant harm didn't wait at gates. People who meant harm came through gates, or over fences, or around the long way in the dark. A man who waited at your gate, in full morning light, with his hands where you could see them, was a man who understood that she had a choice to make, and intended to let her make it. She set down the bucket handle and walked toward him. 6 feet 8 inches of copper-haired widow in a work apron, crossing the dry yard toward a stranger, who was waiting with the patience of someone who had learned that patience was the better strategy. She was aware that this was exactly the sort of scene the women at church would have opinions about. She was aware that she did not care about that. She stopped 6 feet from the gate. They looked at each other. "Mrs. Wolfe," he said. His English was precise and unaccented, the English of someone who had learned it as a second language decades ago, and had been speaking it fluently ever since, long past the point where it required effort. "I am Silas Greybear," he said, "elder of the Suvari Western Council." A pause, measured and deliberate. "The man in your barn is my younger brother." Marin held very still. "I came to thank you," he said. She looked at him. The stillness of him, the absence of threat in his posture, the way he hadn't moved toward the gate latch even now. "How did you know he was here?" she said. "We track our own," he said simply. "The way you stated a fact that needed no elaboration." "You came alone," she said. "I came to thank you," he repeated. "Not to frighten you. Those are different purposes. They require different approaches." She opened the gate. He didn't move through it immediately. He waited until she had stepped back, giving her space, not retreating himself, just acknowledging that the step back was hers to take. Then he entered, and they stood in the yard in the morning light. "He will tell you he was injured on patrol," Silas Greybear said. He folded his hands in front of him. "That is what he will say. Because he is stubborn, and he does not like explaining himself to people he hasn't earned trust from yet." He paused. "I am telling you now before he tells you his version. The wound is not from a patrol. 3 men ambushed him 5 days ago. They were Suvari men. Men who have recently come to arrangements with a landowner in this county." Marin's chest went cold in a very specific way. "What kind of arrangements?" she said. "The kind that make it worthwhile to remove a council scout who has been collecting information about land boundary violations." He met her eyes steadily. "The kind that make it worthwhile to ensure that certain information never reaches the territorial commissioners." She breathed in slowly, breathed out. "Who is the landowner?" she said. "I think," Silas Greybear said, "that you already know, Oswald Birch." She didn't say it. But the name arrived in her mind with the weight of something that had been circling her periphery for months, waiting for the moment when she stopped being able to look away from it. The visits to her gate, the polite questions about whether she'd considered selling, phrased as if the question were concern for her well-being rather than hunger for her land. The way Birch looked at Greystone Ridge, never at her, always past her, at the land itself, at the particular way the ridge caught the light in summer, at things she'd realized too late he was calculating rather than appreciating. A man who had already decided something and was waiting for the paperwork to catch up. "My brother is not a safe house guest," Silas said. His tone was not unkind. "I want you to understand that, clearly and without softening. Birch's men know he survived the ambush. They will look for him. And when they find where he is, they'll find him on my property," she said. A pause. "Yes," he said. "And what do you think I should do about that, Mr. Greybear?" He considered her. A long, quiet assessment. "The kind that took in more than the surface, I think," he said slowly. "That you are a woman who has already decided. I came to thank you and to give you information so that decision is made with open eyes rather than closed ones." He reached into the front of his coat and produced something small, flat, wrapped in cloth, and held it out. She took it, unwrapped it slowly, a stone, carved into the shape of a vessel, rounded at the bottom, open at the top. A cup, small enough to sit in her palm with room to spare. Water stone, he said. Given by our council to those who have given water when water was scarce. Not from surplus, but from what remained. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. He met her eyes. You are in our record now, Mrs. Wolfe. Greystone Ridge is in our record. That is not a small thing. She looked at the stone, small in her large from his coat. Thank you, she said. He nodded, turned to go. Mr. Greybear. She stopped him. The information your brother has. Is it enough? To actually do something about Birch, in front of someone with authority to act. He stopped. Didn't turn back immediately. That depends, he said, on whether someone is willing to stand in a room and say it out loud. He walked through the gate and away into the morning light. She stood in the yard, holding a carved stone cup, and thought about rooms. He didn't try to leave again. She wasn't sure. When the decision happened, whether he heard her talking to his brother through the barn wall, or whether it was the second dressing change she did without being asked, or whether his body simply finished the argument it had been making and won. But he stopped trying to go. And in place of that, started doing things. The fence came first. She'd been fighting the east fence line for 6 days. 3 different attempts, 3 different failures. The post. Refusing to hold in the cracked dry earth, no matter what she tried. She came back from the well on the second morning, after finding Dakota, and stopped short. The fence was fixed, not patched. Fixed properly with the post set at an angle that accounted for the soil type. She could see it immediately, that particular brace from underneath, that she'd never quite gotten right. Set deep enough to hold through the end of the drought and after. She stood and looked at it for a long time. Then she went to the barn. Your side? She said. He was sitting in the straw, with his back straight, which was itself a kind of statement. He had rewrapped the wound himself with the second strip of cloth she'd left within reach. Fine, he said. You could have torn it open, I didn't. She looked at the fence through the barn door. Looked back at him, the angle of the brace. Where did you learn that? Something moved in his expression. Not quite a smile. More like a door opening an inch, my father, he said. He said the earth tells you what it needs. If you listen to it instead of arguing with it. Most men think the earth is something you override. Most men, he said, are wrong about a number of things. She stood in the barn door with her arms crossed. He looked back at her without flinching. It was not a hostile look. Not warm in any obvious way either. Something more like 2 people who had unexpectedly recognized each other across a distance neither of them had been expecting. The chicken coop roof needs work, she said. I know, he said. I can see it from here. Your side, I'll be careful. You'll tell me before you do anything that involves climbing. Yes, I mean it. I know you mean it, he said. I heard you the first time. The days that followed were strange in the way that necessary things often are. You don't fully understand why they're working. You just stop questioning and keep going. He did not come into the house. He did not ask to. He slept in the barn and worked during the hours his side allowed, which she monitored with more attention than she let on. Watching for the particular, tightening around his eyes, that meant he was pushing past reasonable and finding reasons to need his opinion on things that required sitting rather than lifting. He appeared to understand what she was doing. He didn't comment on it. 2 cups on the porch table each morning. She hadn't planned that. It had just happened on the 3rd day and then continued. The way habits form when nobody objects to them strongly enough to stop them. He waited for her to pour first, every morning, without fail. She noticed, didn't ask about it, just noticed. At night, she'd look out the window before sleep, fix, and see him in the barn doorway, or sitting out under the stars, with his face turned up in a way that struck her as something between conversation and prayer. Like talking to something that wasn't there anymore, or something that was there in a way that didn't require being seen. She understood that feeling. She understood it more than she would have admitted to anyone in Callow Crossing. He fixed the chicken coop roof on the fourth day, moving slowly and carefully, with the particular economy of someone who has learned to spend physical effort the way you spend money in a drought. Only where it's needed, only what the situation requires. He repaired a section of barn siding that had been loose since spring. He cleaned and sharpened her tools without being asked, leaving them laid out in a row that made her stop and look for a moment before putting them away. She started leaving things out for him. A second cup without comment, a plate of food timed to when she knew he'd be at the barn. Small adjustments that neither of them discussed. The communication between them was mostly practical. Where is the post hole tool? The roan mare needs her shoe checked. The north water trough has a crack. The kind of conversation that builds something durable between people without ever becoming sentimental about it. What she didn't expect, couldn't have expected, was how much the silence mattered. She had been alone on this ridge since February. Before that, she had been alone in a different way. The way of a person who shares a house with someone who keeps them at a careful, polite distance, who manages things rather than living with them. The silence of Dakota's presence was a different animal entirely. It had weight and direction to it. It occupied the space between them not as an absence but as something actual. Something she hadn't realized she'd been missing until it was there. On the fifth day she went to town, she had to. The supplies weren't going to appear by wishing, and the well situation had reached the point where she needed to ask at the mercantile about the nearest water hauler, who was still running the east route. She left Biscuit in the barn. He had returned on his own, 2 hours after she'd found Dakota, which she chose to interpret as fate or laziness, depending on her mood, and hitched the roan mare. Callow Crossing was a town that took considerable pride in knowing owned his business and everyone else's. She felt it the moment she turned down Main Street. That particular quality of attention settling over her, sharpening from the usual mild curiosity about the tall widow, from the ridge, into something more pointed, more interested, more deliberate. Someone had talked. She didn't know who, and it didn't matter who. What mattered was the way Mrs. Pittman turned to the woman beside her and said something quiet behind her hand. And both of them looked at Marin, with the specific expression of people who feel they have something to feel. She went directly to the mercantile. The conversation happening inside stopped when she pushed through the door. Then restarted, poorly, the way a conversation does, when the person it's about has just walked in. She picked up her flour, her salt, 3 pounds of dried beans she couldn't really afford, set them on the counter in front of Theodore Marsh, who ran the mercantile and was, underneath his considerable tendency to pass information along, a fundamentally decent man who would feel bad about what he was doing even while he did it. Water hauler, she said. Who's running the east route this season? Probably Delaney, he said. Out of Hollister Creek, he trustworthy? Mostly. He glanced toward the back of the store, where 2 men she recognized as Birch's Eastern ranch hands had developed a sudden pressing interest in a display of rope. Marin, he said, lower. You doing all right up there? Fine, she said. People are saying. He stopped. Started again. There are stories going around. There always are. These ones specifically. He met her eyes with the look of a man trying to warn someone, without technically being the person who warned them. Birch's men are asking questions about the West Ridge. About tracks. She looked at him for a moment. Thank you, Theodore, she said. She picked up her supplies and left. Deputy Garrow caught her halfway to the flatbed. He was a man of about 48, with the carefully neutral face of someone who had learned, over many years of doing a job in a small town, to show only precisely what he intended to show and nothing else. Not unkind, not especially courageous. Somewhere, in the careful middle distance between both qualities, where most people in positions like his ended up living, Miss Wolfe. He said, Deputy, you want to tell me what's going on at your place? Farming, she said. Same as always, he sighed. Marin, Deputy Garrow. She shifted the flour to her other arm. I have a man recovering from an injury on my property. He arrived in bad shape. I provided basic care. That is the extent of what is happening at my place. A Suvari man, a man, she said, with a wound that needed tending, which I tended. Because that is what decent people do when they find someone who needs it. He looked at her for a long moment. Birch is going to make trouble, he said. Birch, she said, has been trying to make trouble since February. This isn't news. This is different from February trouble. She looked at him. How? He looked down at his boots. Back up. He came into the office yesterday, he said. Brought papers. Not violence. Papers. He mentioned your husband's name. He mentioned a debt arrangement. Her whole body went still. Not visibly, she'd had 11 years of practice at stillness. But inside, where it counted. What kind of debt arrangement? She said. I don't know the details. He didn't share them. But he was smiling. Marin, he met her eyes. The way a man smiles when he thinks he's already won and is just waiting for everyone else to catch up. She stood in front of the Callow Crossing Mercantile, with 50 pounds of supplies in her arms and the quiet, expanding feeling of something she hadn't fully identified yet, taking shape in her chest. Not panic, not fear. Something more specific, recognition. Thank you, she said to Garrow. She put the supplies in the flatbed and drove home. She did not think about it on the road home. She focused instead on Biscuit's gait. He was slightly favoring the left rear, something to check tonight, and the cloud formation building to the northwest, which might or might not mean rain and was probably not going to mean rain, and the particular sound the flatbed axle was making that it hadn't been making last week. She thought carefully about all of these things. She did not think about Aldous and his clever hands managing the accounts. She did not think about papers. She did not think about the old chest in the storage room that she hadn't opened since February because some reckonings had their own hour and she hadn't been ready for that one yet. She drove home, unhitched the mare, checked Biscuit's hoof, and found a small stone lodged near the frog that explained the favoring, removed it, made a mental note. Brought 2 cups to the porch. Dakota was already on the lower step, back straight despite the side that still pulled when he moved. He looked up when she came out. Didn't ask. He had a quality she'd been noticing all week. He waited. Not impatiently. Not pointedly. Just waited. As if he understood that she'd say what needed saying when she was ready to say it. Bad day? In town? He said eventually. Not unusual, she said. But something. She held her cup with both hands. Felt the warmth of it. Birch went to the deputy's office. With papers. Something about Aldous and a debt arrangement. Dakota was quiet. You know what he has, she said. It wasn't quite a question. He turned the carved stone at his collar, over in his fingers. Once, twice, I know what he's been collecting, he said carefully. Property transfers. Debt instruments. Arrangements made with men who were sick or desperate, or who didn't fully understand what they were agreeing to. He paused. Birch doesn't steal land. He purchases it. Very legally, very deliberately, from people who have no real choice in the moment, and Aldous, he looked at her directly. I don't know your husband's specific situation. But the pattern is consistent, she breathed in. Out. He died of a fever, she said. In February. The doctor couldn't name it, said it had been building for a while. That might be true, Dakota said, but Birch has a doctor, a private one, very good at managing the timeline of certain illnesses. He said it flatly, without heat, the way you stated things you had verified and could not make untrue by wishing. I don't know if that's what happened to your husband, Mrs. Wolfe. I want to be clear about that. But I know what the man you're dealing with is capable of. The evening light was going orange at the ridge edges. Somewhere in the barn, one of the horses shifted and stamped. Marin set her cup on the porch railing. Aldous wasn't a good husband, she said. Not angry, not sad. Just stating a fact that had taken a long time to become speakable. He was careful with me. Not cruel, just careful. The way some men are careful with things they value, without quite loving them. Like I was an investment he was trying to protect. The way he protected his accounts. Yes, Dakota said. But even a careful man doesn't deserve what you're describing. No, he said, he doesn't. A long silence. Not empty. The kind that holds things for a while, before you decide what to do with them. I need to look at those documents, she said. Yes, he said, tonight. Yes, she stood up, picked up both cups, went inside. She lit the lamp in the storage room. She put her hands on the latch of the old chest. She opened it. The debt was real, that was the first thing. Not metaphorical, not misunderstood, not a matter of perspective. Real on paper, in Aldous' handwriting that she knew as well as her own. A promissory note to the Birch Land and Credit Company, dated 5 years ago. The amount was larger than she'd known they needed for anything. More than she'd known they had ever borrowed. She didn't know what the money had been for. There were no records of where it went. Just the note, and the interest on the note, and the subsequent note that restructured the interest on the first note when the first payment schedule proved impossible, and the arrangement that was made when the restructured interest came due and couldn't be met. The land, Aldous had pledged the land, not sold it. She could see that, read that distinction clearly. He hadn't transferred the deed. What he'd done was technically more complex and practically more devastating. He had signed a conditional transfer agreement, contingent on the final payment of the debt, which the agreement defined as a lump sum settlement by a date now 6 months past. If the debt was paid, the condition never triggered. If it wasn't paid, if Aldous died before settling it, the transfer of Greystone Ridge to Oswald Birch became, by the terms of the agreement, automatic, legal, completely, depressingly, irrefutably legal. She sat on the floor of the storage room, with the documents spread around her, and thought, 11 years. 11 years she had worked this land. 11 years of fences, and harvests and droughts, and the particular kind of hard winter that tested whether you had actually built anything or just built something that looked like it. 11 years of watching a man die slowly enough that she'd thought she was ready, and burying him in the ground behind the cedar, stand where the soil was softer, and she had never known, he had never told her. She went through the papers again, slower, looking for the thing she'd missed, looking for the piece that changed the picture. Anything that said, here, in this clause, in this overlooked paragraph, here is where you find out. You still have ground beneath your feet. She found it. Almost missed it entirely, because it was in the fourth document, the amended restructuring agreement. In a subordinate clause, under a heading about payment schedules that she'd read past twice, before something made her go back. All debt obligations, as stated herein, shall be considered satisfied in full upon delivery of harvest proceeds, as detailed in Exhibit C for the calendar years 1881, 1882, and 1883, the receipt of which shall be acknowledged by the creditor in writing. She stared at it. 3 years of harvest proceeds. She turned to Exhibit C. The amounts were there. Specific, detailed, precisely documented in the way of a legal document that expected to be contested. Amounts she recognized, not exactly, but in the right range. She had delivered harvests to the Birch Grain Depot in 1881, and in 1882, and in 1883. She had done it because Aldous managed the accounts, and Aldous told her where to deliver, and she had delivered there and thought nothing more about it. The way you don't think about the mechanics of the machine when the machine is running. She didn't have the receipts. Receipts would have been Aldous', filed somewhere, in his careful system that she hadn't yet fully mapped. But she knew, sitting on the storage room floor with the lamp burning low, and the night pressing against the small window, that those deliveries had happened. That 3 years of harvest had been accepted at Birch's operation, and that if harvest proceeds satisfied the debt, if Exhibit C was fulfilled, then the conditional transfer had never triggered. The land might still be hers. Not certainly. Not without proof that a court would accept. Not without someone who could read these documents on legal authority and confirm that she was reading them correctly. But possibly. She gathered the papers. All of them. Put them in order. Placed them in the old leather satchel that Aldous had used for important documents. Because that much he had taught her. That important papers needed to live in a dedicated place. And that was, she acknowledged, among the useful things. She stood up, blew out the lamp. Stood in the dark storage room for a moment, thought, tomorrow. I'll figure out tomorrow what to do with this. Tonight I just need to know what I know." She walked back to the house. Through the window she could see the barn door, partially open, and in the gap the dark shape of Dakota, sitting with his back against the post, face turned up to the stars, talking to something that wasn't there. Or that was there in a way that didn't need to be visible to be present. She stood at the window and watched him for a moment without meaning to. She thought about his brother at the gate. The Waterstone, the word record, she thought. "I have been on this land for 11 years. I have never once known what was underneath it. Not the water below the ridge. Not the documents in the chest. Not the debt Aldous was managing with his careful hands while I was fixing fences and hauling harvests and thinking we were building something together. Two people doing it together, she thought. But I know now. The knowing doesn't fix anything, but it changes what the next step is. That's what knowing does. It changes the step." She let the curtain fall. She went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time. But when she did, finally, it was the sleep of someone who has stopped being surprised by the size of the thing in front of them and started calculating how to move it. Expansion. Section 3 extended. The language of working beside someone continued on the 7th morning. She brought bread to the barn, not because she owed him anything. Because she had bread, and he had fixed the fence and the chicken coop and 3 sections of barn siding and the chicken waterer that had been leaking since April. And there was a kind of ledger in living that she had always believed in, even when she couldn't name it. He was sitting in the open barn doorway when she came across the yard, his back against one side of the frame, watching the horizon with that particular quality of attention she was beginning to recognize as simply the way he inhabited any space, fully, quietly, without waste. She set the bread on the boards beside him. He looked at it, looked at her. "You don't have to," he said. "I know," she said. "That's how you know it's not obligation." He picked up the bread. She stood in the yard for a moment, not quite leaving. "The well," she said. "Down another inch this week," he said. "But the seep is still active. If you can keep drawing slowly enough to let it refill overnight, you'll have enough." She looked at the well. She'd been doing exactly that calculation herself every morning. But doing it alone was different from having someone confirm it from the outside. Someone who had looked at the situation with fresh eyes and arrived at the same conclusion. There was something settling about that, like a measurement taken twice. "The roan's hoof is sound," she said. "I checked this morning." "I know," he said. "I checked it last night." She looked at him. He almost smiled. That door opening an inch. She went back to the house. On the 9th morning he spoke first. She was at the porch table with her accounts. The real ones. The ones that didn't include Aldous' careful fictions. The ones that showed the ridge as it actually was financially, rather than as Aldous had presented it. And the sound of him on the porch step was enough to make her look up. He sat on the lower step. Didn't ask permission. Just settled there, with the morning between them. "In my people's tradition," he said, after a moment, "there is a word for what you are doing here." She waited. "Not a flattering word," he said. "It means a person who refuses to let the earth win." She considered this. "Is that a compliment in your tradition?" she said. "Complicated," he said. "We believe the earth will always win in the end. So refusing it is, not unwise." "Exactly. More like brave and slightly foolish at the same time." "That's the most accurate description of farming I've ever heard," she said. He did the door opening an inch thing with his face. "There is another word," he said, "for when someone refuses to leave a place and the place accepts them. When the land stops being something you fight and becomes something you belong to." She looked at the ridge, the dry grass, the cracked earth, the well with its stubborn seep. "I've been fighting it for 11 years, she said. "I know," he said. "But I've been watching you this week, and I think," he paused, selected the word carefully, "I think it stopped fighting back." She sat with that for a moment. "That sounds like something your father would say," she said. He looked at the horizon. "Yes," he said, "it does." On the 11th morning he told her about the Suvari winter. Not a formal telling, not something he sat down to, not something he preamble. just something that came out while they were stacking them. The last of the summer's dry wood, wood against the barn wall, and she had asked, without thinking, whether his people had a word for the particular color the sky went in drought. He stopped stacking for a moment. "We have many words for weather," he said. "More than you have in English. We have a word for the sky just before rain that everyone has stopped believing in a word. For the wind that comes from the east in winter and doesn't warm you even when it should. A word for the light on snow that is so bright it becomes its own kind of darkness." She stacked a log. "What's the one for drought?" he considered. The closest translation is something like, "The patience of the land before it decides." She stood with a log in her hands and turned this over. "Decides what?" she said. "Whether you deserve to stay on it," he said. "And how does it decide?" He picked up another log. "By how you behave when things are hard," I said. "When there's not enough. Whether you share what little there is," or she thought about the canteen. "The last water. And if you share it," she said, "then the land remembers," he said. "And eventually it gives back." She looked at the well. "That's a very long feedback loop," she said. "The land is patient," he said. "We are the impatient ones." She stacked the log. They worked in silence for a while. The comfortable kind. The kind that didn't need filling. "Your people," she said eventually. "Do they have a word for?" She stopped. Started again. "For working beside someone you don't know and finding that it works?" He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "What is it?" He said a word in Suvari that she couldn't reproduce phonetically. "What does it mean in English?" she said. He stacked the last log and dusted off his hands. "Two people who have not yet become something, but are not yet nothing either," he said. She thought about that for a long moment. "That's not a comfortable place to be," she said. "No," he agreed, "but it's an honest one." Morning came harder and brighter than the day before. She was at the well when Dakota came out of the barn, moving more easily than yesterday. She noticed it immediately, the way his stride had leveled out, the careful guarding of his left side, diminished but not gone. He was healing fast. She should have been relieved about this, and she was. She was also aware that it meant the conversation about what came next was getting closer. He looked at her. She looked at him. "I found the documents last night," she said. He nodded once, which told her he'd been expecting this. "There's a clause that might save the land," she said. "A fulfillment clause. 3 years of harvest deliveries to Birch's depot that should have satisfied the debt if they were made. If they were received, if they were properly recorded." She held his eyes. "I made those deliveries. I don't have the receipts. Birch almost certainly has the master records, and he's the one who would decide whether they count. Unless someone else decides that," he said. "Judge Percival Hatch," she said. "Retired territorial judge. He still has jurisdiction for special sessions in contested property matters. He's in Harrows Creek, 3 days west." Dakota was quiet for a moment. He looked at the ridge, the dry land around them, the well with its reluctant water. "Birch won't wait 3 days," he said. "No," she agreed. "He'll come here first, before you can ride for Harrows Creek." "Yes, which means we have today. Maybe tomorrow morning." "Yes." He looked at her. She looked at him. "The information you collected," she said, "about Birch and the land boundary violations. You said it was enough to matter in front of someone with authority. Write it down, everything. Your name and your council affiliation." Something shifted in his face. In that territory between recognition and something that didn't have a ready name. "You're not asking me to fight," he said. "No," she said. "I'm asking you to witness. There's a difference." A pause. "All right," he said. "Good," she said. "I'll get paper." She turned toward the house. "Mrs. Wolfe," he said. She stopped. "Marin," she corrected. "If we're writing to a territorial judge together, you may as well use my name." Another pause, longer. "Marin," he said. Something about the way he said it. Not performance, not politeness. The word itself, given the weight appropriate to it. "The water you gave me," he said, "the first morning. You gave the last of what you had." "Yes," she said. "Most people would not have done that." She considered it. "Most people," she said, "would not have had to." She went inside and got the paper. The paper took most of the morning. Dakota wrote, slowly and deliberately, with the care of someone choosing words that would be read in a room he couldn't see by people who were looking for reasons to dismiss them. His handwriting, she noticed from across the table, was precise and architectural. Each letter given its proper space, nothing crowded, nothing hurried. She had expected something rougher, something more different, which told her something uncomfortable about herself he filed away. He filled 3 pages and then added dates when she asked for them, which took another 20 minutes, and when he set the pen down, the pages contained enough to matter. She made cornbread, set 2 plates on the porch table. He came out of the barn. He'd gone to check on the horses without being asked, finding the roan mare's left hind shoe loose in the process, and sat across from her. He waited for her to start eating. She'd been noticing this every morning. "Why do you do that?" she said. "Wait," he said, understanding her immediately. He considered it seriously, as if the question deserved real thought rather than a reflex answer. "My grandmother said, 'The one who eats last knows whether there was enough. The one who eats first doesn't always notice.'" Marin looked at her plate. Back at him, "That's either very wise or very inconvenient," she said. "Both," he said. "Mostly both." She took a bite. He ate. The silence between them had taken on a comfortable quality she hadn't expected and didn't examine too closely. "I'll ride for Harrow's Creek in the morning," she said. "Before first light," he nodded. "Your side," she said. "We'll manage. I need to know honestly." "It will manage," he said. "Not sharp, just certain. The certainty of information rather than performance." She let it go. The morning they were supposed to leave started wrong. Not catastrophically wrong. Just wrong, not the specific way of a morning where you'd planned carefully, and the world had different ideas. She was in the yard before dawn. Horses hitched, satchel packed. Dakota already mounted on the horse his brother had left at the south tree line 2 days ago, when she heard the horses on the road. Not 1, not 2, 4, coming from the north. From the canyon direction, the route nobody used unless they knew the back way in, which meant people who had been watching the ridge. She reached under the flatbed seat for the rifle. Dakota had gone still on his horse, with the particular quality of someone whose alertness had shifted to a different frequency. 4 riders came through the north gate, in a loose line, unhurried. Unhurried was more frightening than a charge. A charge meant momentum and opportunity. Unhurried meant they believed the outcome was already decided. She recognized the second rider, a man named Stell, who worked Birch's eastern operation. The lead rider she didn't know. Well-dressed for horseback at dawn in a way that was a kind of message. He looked at her. At Dakota. At the packed flatbed. "Going somewhere, Mrs. Wolf?" "Supply run," she said. Same pleasant surface. Long way to pack for a supply run. He produced a folded document from his coat. "Franklin Hale. I represent Mr. Birch's interests." He held out the document. "Notice of conditional transfer activation for Greystone Ridge. The debt securing the conditional agreement passed uncured at the time of Mr. Aldous Wolf's death. This notice formally activates the transfer." She looked at it. Did not take it. "You'll need it through the district court," she said. Hale smiled. "The district court reviews and confirms. It doesn't litigate. Unless you can show cause." He tilted his head. "Can you show cause, Mr. Hale?" Dakota's voice, even quiet, carrying. "Mrs. Wolf has indicated she will respond through the district court. That is her legal right." Hale looked at him. Something moved in his face. "I don't believe I was addressing you," he said. "I don't believe that requires my agreement," Dakota said. Marin pressed her lips together. "Not the moment." But she noted it. Hale redirected to her. "Mr. Birch's standing offer remains. $50 and safe passage east. That is considerably more than the law requires him to offer. $50 for 11 years. For the fences and the droughts and the grief and the dead husband, who had been building walls around her without saying a word about it. $50. Tell Mr. Birch," she said, "that I'll see him in court." Hale folded the document back into his coat. "Left it at the district office," he said. 14 days to respond. She would use them wisely, he suggested. He rode out. The others followed. Stell was the last, and he looked at Dakota for a long measuring moment before he turned. The gate swung behind them. She breathed, just breathed. 14 days, Dakota said. Yes. We leave now. I know. She walked to the well, drew the bucket, filled the 2 canteens, mostly clean, more than she'd gotten in weeks, put them in the flatbed. Looked at the ridge. 11 years. Okay, she climbed up. Let's go, she said. The road to Harrow's Creek was 3 days of dry ruts and shale and creek crossings where water used to run. They rode mostly in silence, the useful kind. She was composing arguments in her head, building the case, testing it, finding the weak places and shoring them up. Dakota rode beside her, with the particular alert stillness of someone who was always reading the terrain around them, cataloging it automatically. Your jaw, he said on the first day, does a specific thing when you're working through a problem. She glanced at him. What specific thing? Like you're testing something's structural integrity. She thought about that. That's either perceptive or alarming, both, he said. His tone was exactly the same as when he'd said it about his grandmother's wisdom. Like both was always the honest answer and the only thing worth saying. They talked through Culp, the former depot foreman she'd need if her case came down to the receiving ledger. They talked through Silas and the boundary documentation. They talked about what Hatch would need and what he would resist. That first night, camped at the canyon fork, she found the clause she'd been looking for in the 4th document. The one specifying that the depot foreman's receipts constituted proof of fulfillment. Dakota leaned over to read it, close enough that she was aware of the firelight on his profile and the completeness of his attention. You don't need Birch to produce anything, he said. You need the receiving ledger subpoenaed, which a judge can issue, she said. Which means Birch can't make it disappear by simply refusing. He would have already altered it, Dakota said. Maybe. Maybe not. The question is whether we can get the subpoena filed before he has time. She folded the document back. Tomorrow we push harder. Biscuit will manage, he said. I'll explain the situation to him. She looked at him. He was not quite smiling, but almost. You're going to talk to my horse, she said. He responds to direct conversation, he said. I've been speaking to him in the evenings. She stared at him for a moment longer than she intended to. If this works, she said, I will acknowledge that you talked a horse into moving faster. I would not ask for acknowledgement, he said. Just accuracy. She turned back to the fire, thought 11 years. 11 years of Aldous. Never once making her laugh, not even by accident. She looked at the stars instead of saying that. They reached Harrow's Creek at midday of the 3rd day, larger than Callow Crossing, more organized. The kind of town where decisions got made, rather than just discussed endlessly until they dissolved. A limestone courthouse with actual columns. A bell that rang on the hour and meant it. Judge Percival Hatch had his chambers above the dry goods store, which was where he worked since retiring from the main court, receiving cases that needed his particular experience, by appointment or by the kind of stubborn arrival that made appointment unnecessary. He was 68, white-haired, spare and angular, in the way of someone who had always been more interested in thinking than eating. He wore glasses on a chain around his neck, and when he looked at Marin over the tops of them, his expression was not surprised. More like resigned to something he'd been expecting. You're going to be difficult, he said. I have documents, she said. Difficult people always have documents. But he held out his hand. She gave him the satchel. He read for 20 minutes. She stood. Dakota stood. Neither of them spoke, because there was nothing to say that the documents hadn't already said better. He set the last page down. Your Suvari Council, he said to Dakota, Scout. Reporting to the Western Council. Your boundary documentation. It exists? My brother Silas Graybear holds it. He can be reached through the Western Council office. Hatch looked at him for a long moment. You understand that Suvari testimony is not consistently received in territorial court. I understand, Dakota said. I am asking you to change that. A pause, one case at a time, Hatch said. Impossible to tell if that was a refusal or a beginning. He turned back to Marin, the fulfillment clause. You believe the deliveries were made. I know they were made, she said. My hands on the reins. 3 consecutive years. You have no receipts. I have the legal basis for a subpoena of the receiving ledger, she said steadily, which I'm formally requesting. Now. Before Birch has time to make that ledger inconvenient, he was testing her. She could feel it. Whether she would hold. She held. I'll need a written formal filing, he said. I have it. She reached into the satchel. I wrote it on the road. He looked at the folded pages she held out. Of course you did, he said. He took them. Read them. Picked up his pen. And something in Marin's chest. Some knot that had been tightening since February, since the storage room floor, since the first time Birch had looked past her, at her land, came fractionally loose, not one. Not finished, but started. Really started. They stayed that night in Harrow's Creek. She paid for 2 rooms, with the last of the cash in the satchel's inner pocket, and didn't think too hard about what that meant for the supply situation at home. One problem at a time, in the common room over supper, she asked what he thought of Hatch. Dakota considered it seriously. A man who knows the difference between what the law says and what it should do. Who has spent a long time trying to make those match. He paused. Tired of cases where they don't, which works in our favor, she said, or means he's careful. He won't rule on principle alone. The evidence has to be unambiguous. Then we make it unambiguous, she said. She refilled her water glass. Set it down. Why did you really come to the ridge, she said. He looked up from his plate. You said to watch the land, she said, to protect it from Birch. But that's the council's reason. What's yours? He held her eyes for a moment, then looked at his hands. My mother died on land like yours, he said, on a ridge, in a drought year. Not from violence, from the consequence of violence, the slow kind. The kind where a people are moved to land that cannot sustain them and told this is what you're allowed now. And then watched. He paused. She died in a dry summer 3 years ago, on land she'd been relocated to by men who decided her original home was more useful in their hands. Marin didn't speak. I spent a year being angry about it, he said. Then Silas told me. Anger is a fire you can burn yourself with or cook something with. Choose. He looked back up. So I chose. I joined the Scouts, started documenting, collecting evidence of how men like Birch operate, because a man like that doesn't stop with one ridge. He stops when someone makes him stop. She looked at him, thought, we are not the same. Our histories are different in ways that matter deeply, and yet, here we are. 2 people on the same dry ground for completely different reasons that arrived at the same morning. Cook something with it, she said. Yes, he said. We will, she said. He nodded once. That was enough. The second morning in Harrow's Creek brought information she hadn't anticipated. She was at the postal counter when she heard her name. Not called, mentioned. In the low register of 2 men who believed they were being discreet. She had always had good hearing. One of the small compensations of height. She kept her eyes on the postal clerk and listened. Wolf woman. Here with the Suvari man, Birch no. Hale rode out this morning. She paid for her posting. Walked out at normal speed. Turned the corner, stopped, took a breath. Franklin Hale was in Harrow's Creek. Which meant Birch knew about the subpoena. Which meant someone at the court, some clerk, some contact, had passed word. Which meant the window for the ledger to remain unaltered was narrowing faster than she'd calculated. She walked back to the inn. Dakota saw her face and didn't need more than that. How much time? He said. I don't know exactly. The subpoena goes through the court's officer. Birch can't legally intercept it, but he can do something to the ledger before the officer arrives. Stillness from Dakota. The concentrated kind, culp, he said. She looked at him. Depot foremen keep independent records, he said. Their own tallies. In case of exactly this kind of dispute, he reached into his vest and produced a folded note. My relay message to Silas came back this morning. He knows Culp. Culp left Birch's operation over irregularities he found in the master ledger. Someone had already been altering the historical entries. He kept his own copies specifically because he knew something like this was coming. A pause. He lives 12 miles east of Callow Crossing. Timber Fork, she took the note. Read it. Looked up. We go back now, she said. Biscuit is already saddled, he said. She stared at him. You knew, she said. I guessed, he said. After the relay message. I thought, if we stay here, we're waiting. If we move, we're choosing. I thought you'd want to choose, he paused. I was ready for either. She thought about 11 years of a marriage where nothing was ever ready for either, where every decision had already been made without her, and she was simply informed of the consequences. She thought about how different this felt, just. How different. Let's go, she said. Timber Fork was a small, well-kept operation. 2 rooms, a working barn, and a kitchen garden that was managing the drought better than most, which told you something about the person who planted it. Tobias Culp came to the door before they'd finished tying the horses. Compact 50s, wire-rimmed glasses, a mustache in active negotiation with Gray. He looked at Marin, at Dakota, at the horses. I wondered when someone would come, he said. You've been expecting Mrs. Wolfe, he said. I received 3 delivery tallies with your name on them over 3 years. I copied each one into my own ledger at the time of receipt. I also noticed, 2 months before I left Birch's employ, that the master ledger had been altered on the pages covering those years. Someone had changed the receiving quantities. He removed his glasses, cleaned them, replaced them. I kept my copies because I believe accounts should be accurate. And because I am not a fool, will you testify? She said yes, he said. 1 syllable. The answer of a man who had already made this decision long before she arrived to ask. Birch will make things difficult for you. Birch has already made things difficult for me, Culp said. I lost a good position because I wouldn't change numbers that I knew to be true. I am not going to let that be the end of the story, Marin breathed thought. The world has more Culps in it than Birches. The Birches are louder, but the Culps are there. She had to keep believing that she did believe it. He went inside and returned in 8 minutes with a ledger that contained exactly what she needed. 3 years. Her name, the quantities, the dates. Each number noted with the precision of a man who understood that accuracy was a form of integrity. And at the bottom of each relevant page, in smaller script, discrepancy found in master ledger, see flagged comparison. He had flagged them himself. He had known. He had been waiting for someone who needed this. She closed the ledger. Thank you, she said. Genuinely, make sure it counts for something, he said. We will, she said. They rode back toward Callow Crossing with the light going gold around them. She held the ledger against her chest with one arm, the satchel on her knees, the canteen at her belt. 7 days left, she said. On the transfer notice, Dakota said. If we file the ledger with Hatch's court by Monday, we will. And Silas reaches Harrow's Creek by Thursday, he will. Then we have a real case. A complete one, she paused. Birch's lawyers will try to delay Marin. She looked at him. We have it, he said. Simply, like a statement of fact he'd already verified. She held his eyes, thought, he's certain. Not performing certainty. He's looked at the pieces and he knows, thought. When was the last time someone looked at her situation and said we have it and she believed them? She couldn't remember. She looked at the road, at the ledger, at the last light on Greystone Ridge in the distance. We have it, yes. They were a mile from the ridge when Biscuit stopped. Not gradually, all at once, the way he only stopped when something was wrong. She heard it a moment later, voices from the direction of the ranch. The low sound of men who were at something, and not bothering to be quiet about it because they didn't expect anyone home. She looked at Dakota. He was already still and listening with that complete attention. 3, he said quietly. Maybe 4, house or barn. He listened again. Both, she thought. The ledger and satchel were with her. But there were other papers in the house. Aldous' original records, letters she'd found, documents she hadn't copied. I go first, she said. Marin. I go first, she said, because they're here for the land and the land is mine. If you go first, it looks like a confrontation. If I go first, it's a woman arriving at her own property. She held his eyes, which it is. He did not look happy about this. 30 seconds, he said. No more. 30 seconds, she agreed. She rode into the yard at a walk. Not aggressive, not running. Just arriving, which was her right. 3 men. 1 at the barn door. 2 at the porch, one of them coming back down the steps with the second satchel she kept in the house. The document satchel? Not the one she'd taken to Harrow's Creek. Not the one with what mattered. But still, she stopped Biscuit in the middle of the yard. "That belongs to me," she said. The man on the steps stopped. "Mr. Birch sent us to collect property documents," he said. "Mr. Birch," she said, "can collect property documents through the court process that is currently underway, which does not include walking onto my land without authorization and removing items from my house. We have authorization." "From whom?" she said. "Not from Judge Hatch, not from the district court, from Birch, which is not authorization. That is a man sending employees to do something he knows is illegal and hoping no one pushes back. One word. Don't." To the man at the barn who had started to say something, said at a completely ordinary volume that somehow carried to every corner of the yard bar behind her, Biscuit shifted. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She heard the quality of the silence change as three men recalculated. The man on the steps set the satchel on the porch railing. She got down, walked to the porch, picked up the satchel, checked it. Everything there. "I'll be at the district court Monday morning," she said. "If Mr. Birch has business with me, he knows where to conduct it." They left, not fast, but they left. She stood in the yard until the sound of hooves faded. Then she let out the breath she'd been holding. Dakota came up beside her. "The barn," she said, "nothing taken. They'd only started on the house." She nodded. Patted Biscuit's neck. "Good horse," she said. "He did well." Dakota agreed. She thought she heard something happen in his expression. She chose not to look directly at it. "7 days," she said. "7 days," he agreed. She went inside, lit the lamp, sat at the table with both satchels and Culp's ledger and the carved waterstone that she'd taken to keeping in her pocket. She organized everything for Monday morning. Outside, the stars came up one by one over Greystone Ridge. The well shifted in its deep ground, and somewhere in the dry grass between the house and the barn, one horse stood with his ears forward, watching the dark road, keeping watch. 6 days left, 3 gone on the road to Harrow's Creek, 2 more, moving between Culp and the court, and back again. One night she hadn't slept at all. That was what she woke up thinking on Monday morning. Not good morning. Not coffee. Just 6 days. She was already dressed before the sun cleared the canyon. Dakota was at the horses when she came out. He'd already sent the relay message to Silas at first light. "The East Pass," she said. "Is it clear?" "I sent word to check yesterday," he said. "While you were organizing the documents." She looked at him, thought. 11 years of a marriage where no one ever checked the pass. Where she ran every calculation alone, because there was no one else who would. What she said was, "Good," he almost smiled. They rode. The District Court of Callow County operated out of a converted feed warehouse. This said something about territorial priorities. But the clerk was competent, and Deputy Garrow, she'd learned, actually read what crossed his desk. He was there when they arrived. He looked at her. At Dakota. At the oilcloth-wrapped ledger. "Marin," he said. "I need to file a supplement to my response to the Birch transfer notice," she said. "Witness ledger. Formal subpoena request for the depot receiving records, and a preliminary statement from the Suvari Western Council regarding boundary matters." He blinked. All of that. All of it. Before noon, he looked at Dakota, who said nothing, and let his presence do its work. "Come in." Garrow said the filing took 2 hours. Garrow sat in on it. Not as interference, as something else. She watched him read the fulfillment clause, watched his jaw set when she explained the altered ledger, watched him go quiet when he looked at Culp's independent records. "He changed the amounts," Garrow said. "Not a question. Someone did," she said. "Mr. Culp's records show what was actually received. The current master ledger shows different numbers. I'd like the court to determine why." He looked at the ledger. Then up. "The 3 men at your property Saturday night," he said. "I didn't report an incident," she said. "I'm asking if one occurred. 3 individuals entered my property without authorization and removed an item before returning it when asked. Nothing damaged. Nothing taken. I handled it." He nodded slowly. "The subpoena for the depot ledger," he said. "I can issue it today. Through my deputy authority, time-sensitive evidence integrity. The court officer goes tomorrow morning. Before Birch's lawyers can file a delay, She held very still. "You'd do that," she said. "The law allows it," he said. "This qualifies." He met her eyes. "Don't thank me. Just make sure the ledger has its original pages when the officer gets there. Decent people," she thought again. "They need the right question at the right moment." "That's enough," she said. Outside, standing on the board sidewalk, she looked at the street. Dakota came to stand beside her. "Garrow surprised me," she said. "People do that," he said. "When they finally decide." She looked at the faces she knew, the mercantile, the saloon, the church at the far end. Someone across the street noticed her and looked away too fast. Someone else didn't look away at all. Old Mrs. Fitch, 70-some, had lived in Callow Crossing since before it was called Callow Crossing, was standing outside the dressmaker's with a basket over her arm. She walked across the street. Marin braced. Mrs. Fitch stopped in front of her and looked up. Marin had 8 inches on the old woman at minimum. "I remember your deliveries to the Birch Depot," she said. 1881, 1882, 1883. I kept the books there the 3rd year. Before Culp took over, Marin stared. "My handwriting is in that ledger," Mrs. Fitch said. "The original one. Before someone changed the numbers. I kept my own copy, same as Culp. Because I am not a fool and I knew what Birch was." She shifted her basket. "Theodore Marsh told me you were filing this morning. I thought you should know. I will be at the district court at whatever time you need me." She walked past Marin into the dressmaker's shop. Marin stood on the sidewalk. She pressed her lip together, very tightly, not because she was sad. "2 witnesses," she said. Her voice was steady, mostly. "Yes," he said. "For the same ledger." "Yes, Birch," she said, "is going to have a very bad week." "Yes," he said. And this time the almost smile was less almost than it had ever been. Tuesday. The court officer went out to the depot at 7. As Garrow had promised. She watched him leave from the window of the mercantile, where she was spending the last reasonable money she had on supplies. Beans before coffee, salt before everything else. The humbling arithmetic of a person who has bet everything on one sequence of events going correctly. The officer came back at noon. She wasn't at the court when he returned. She heard about it from Theodore, who heard from the clerk, who processed the returned ledger within an hour. The ledger had been subpoenaed. The original pages were intact. Garrow had moved fast enough. Birch had not had time. She sat in the mercantile with a sack of dried beans and a feeling she didn't have a precise word for. Something between relief and the clear-eyed understanding that relief was premature and she was not done yet. Not done, but the ledger was in court custody, which meant it couldn't be changed. Which meant the discrepancy between Culp's records and the master ledger was now official. Which meant Thursday had to go right. Wednesday she fixed the barn roof, because it needed doing. Because she had told Dakota she would acknowledge the second leak existed, and she was a woman of her word. Because keeping her hands busy when her mind was running scenarios was the only reliable method she had for staying functional rather than frantic. He worked beside her. They didn't talk much. Not because there was nothing to say. There was. There always seemed to be now, which was still surprising to her. But because the work required attention, and the attention was itself a kind of conversation. The way you handed someone a board, without asking, because you'd been working beside them long enough to know when they needed it. The way you moved without announcing it. The way the morning settled around 2 people doing a thing together without commentary. At noon she sat on the barn roof edge, with her legs hanging over and drank from her canteen. Silas messaged. Dakota said from the yard below, "He'll reach Harrow's Creek tonight." "Good, he's bringing everything." "All 6 years of documentation." "Good." She looked at the ridge, the well. The fence Dakota had set in the dry earth 3 weeks ago, already holding better than anything she'd managed alone. "After Thursday," she said. "Whatever happens, the land is worth fighting for. I want you to know I understand that now, not as property, not as what I'm owed. As something that holds things." She paused. "History," she said. "Water. Memory." He was quiet for a moment down in the yard. "My mother used to say the land is not yours. You belong to it." Another pause. "I used to think that was about humility." Now I think it's about responsibility. She thought about that. If we win this, she said. The aquifer Silas mentioned in his boundary documentation. The water underneath this ridge. It shouldn't belong to Birch, but honestly, it shouldn't just belong to me either. She looked at the well. There are farms in this valley that have been hauling from the river all summer. She stopped. She'd surprised herself. Not with the idea. She'd been working toward it. Somewhere underneath the main problem, but with saying it out loud, which made it real. He was looking up at her from the yard. Full attention. You're thinking about the valley, he said. I'm thinking about what the land is for, she said. If I win it, a pause. When you win it, he said. She looked at him. When, she repeated. Yes, he said. She climbed down. They fixed the second leak. Harrow's Creek again. The road faster this time because she knew it. She arrived with 2 hours to spare and used them sitting with Silas Graybear in the inn's common room, going through every document one final time. He had brought 6 years of boundary documentation, organized identically to the way she organized her own records, cross-referenced, flagged, notes in the margins in that same precise handwriting she'd seen in Dakota's testimony. Brothers. Obviously, the pattern is consistent across 47 documented cases, Silas said, without heat, the way you stated mathematical facts. Birch identifies land with resource value, identifies the weakest financial link in the ownership chain, makes contact, arranges terms, waits, he turned a page. In 43 of 47 cases, the land transferred within 2 years of the initial arrangement. 4 cases didn't transfer, she said. 3 were contested successfully in court. He looked at her. 1 the owner simply refused to leave. They're still there. Which one? She said. A man named Orrin Delaney, Silas said. He runs a water hauling business now. East Route, she blinked Delaney. The name Theodore had mentioned, the East Route hauler, who had been on that road for years because he'd refused to leave his land. And found another way. Judge Percival Hatch's chambers smelled of old paper and cedar smoke, and the accumulated weight of decisions made over a long time. He was at his desk when they came in, she and Dakota, and Silas and Culp, who had ridden in that morning on a borrowed horse with his ledger in a case exactly like Silas's, which she found deeply satisfying, and Mrs. Fitch, who arrived last, slightly out of breath with her basket over her arm. Hatch looked at all of them for a long moment. Well, he said, "Good morning, Judge." Marin said, "Mrs. Wolfe." He looked at the assembled group. "You've assembled a case." "I've assembled the truth," she said, "which happens to be organized into a case." Something moved in his expression. The delay petition Birch's representation had filed that morning was denied in 30 seconds. Garrow's authority under Section 14 was unambiguous. Hatch set it aside and said, "Let's proceed." He went through everything methodically. The fulfillment clause, Culp's ledger against the subpoenaed master record, Mrs. Fitch's account of the 1883 entries in her own handwriting, Silas's boundary documentation, which he read with careful attention. Dakota's written account, the 3 pages plus dates, was the last thing he read. He read it twice. The fulfillment clause, Hatch said. 2 witnesses, independent ledgers, and the subpoenaed master record all confirm delivery of harvest proceeds consistent with Exhibit C. For all 3 relevant years, yes, she said. The master ledger alterations are clearly inconsistent with the independent records. He paused. I'll need to refer this to the territorial attorney. I would expect so, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Mrs. Wolfe. Something outside the formal record, she waited. You found the fulfillment clause by accident, he said. Looking for seed money. Yes, you almost lost this land to chance. She thought about Biscuit breaking the west fence at 5 in the morning. About following him into the scrubland. About the pile of something that turned out to be a man. About the last water in a canteen. I almost lost it to a lot of things, she said. But here we are. He held her eyes. Here we are, he said. He picked up his pen. That was not the end. Birch's new representation, a man named Alderton, older than Hale, more deliberate, arrived at 2 in the afternoon. He placed a document on the desk that she had not seen coming. Mr. Birch acknowledges the fulfillment clause, Alderton said. He acknowledges the delivery records. She felt the ground shift. He was conceding the ledger issue, which meant, however, Alderton said, the conditional transfer agreement was signed by Mr. Aldous Wolfe in his capacity as sole owner of Greystone Ridge. The property was acquired by Mr. Wolfe prior to the marriage. Under territorial property statute, premarital property acquired in the husband's name is classified as separate property. He set a second document beside the first. Mrs. Wolfe's name does not appear on the original deed. It was never added. The fulfillment clause argues the conditional transfer was discharged. But the discharge is only relevant if Mrs. Wolfe has standing to contest the transfer at all. He looked at Hatch, which, under the statute, she does not. Silence. The specific silence of a room whose floor has just been removed because she had not seen that. She had not looked at the deed. She had assumed because it was her land, because she'd built it, because she'd been there every day for 11 years with her hands in it. Her name was not on the deed, because Aldous had not put it there. She looked at Hatch. He was reading the statute. His face was the careful neutral she'd learned to read by now. But something underneath it, he set it down, looked at her. She looked back and thought, I have to find the argument. I have to find the piece of this that pushes back. Because if I don't, Your Honor, Silas Graybear's voice, he stood. He reached into the leather case and produced something she had never seen before. Not a ledger, not a letter. Something older than both. A document on material that was not quite paper, something more durable, preserved with extraordinary care. He set it on the desk. The Suvari Greystone Land Record, he said. Documented by the Western Council in 1847, updated through 1861. It predates the territorial deed system by 19 years. Hatch looked at it. The record establishes Greystone Ridge as Suvari seasonal territory under the terms of the 1846 Treaty of Mutual Recognition, Silas said. That treaty was ratified and never formally dissolved, which means the original stewardship recognition remains technically operative. He looked at Hatch. I'm not saying this resolves the standing question. I'm saying it establishes that this land has a prior recorded history of stewardship use that precedes any territorial deed, which means the question of who has standing is not simply a matter of whose name appears on a document issued in 1872. He sat down. The room was quiet. Hatch looked at the old document, at the ledger, at Silas, at Morin. He took his glasses off, cleaned them. Put them back on, Mr. Alderton, he said. The statute you've cited addresses marital property in the context of acquisition and sale, not stewardship and use over an extended period. He paused. I'm going to need time to research whether the standing question can be addressed through an adverse possession argument. Given that Mrs. Wolfe has openly, notoriously, and continually maintained this property for 11 years, Alderton started to object. I am not ruling today, Hatch said, with the tone of a man who has decided what he's going to say and is going to finish saying it. I am taking this under advisement. But I am issuing an immediate stay on the transfer activation pending my review. He looked at Marin. You have more time, more time. Not a win, more time. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, he said. Outside, she stood on the board sidewalk and thought, not one. Not finished. More time, which she knew how to use. She had been using time on that ridge for 11 years. She could use 2 more weeks. Marin, Dakota. She looked at him. You're calculating again, he said. Always, she said. The jaw, he said. The jaw, she agreed. They found the horses. But she wasn't done thinking. Adverse possession, she said. 11 years of open, continuous use. Hatch mentioned it himself. It's a real argument. Alderton will need to prove I didn't maintain the land, which is going to be difficult given that approximately 40 people in Callow County have watched me do exactly that. She paused. Garrow will testify if asked. He will, Dakota said. And Mrs. Fitch, because Mrs. Fitch appears to have been compiling a personal dossier on Birch for approximately a decade, which I find enormously comforting. Something happened in Dakota's expression, not almost smile, actual smile, full and real. The kind that changed his whole face and made it difficult to think about other things. She had been wondering what it looked like. Now she knew, which was a problem. She filed it, old Delaney, Dakota said. The water hauler. He's driven past Greystone Ridge every season for 11 years. He's seen you working it. Can we reach him by tomorrow, she said. I already sent a message, he said. She stared. When? This morning. Before we left, I thought Hatch might not rule immediately. He paused. It seemed worth preparing. She looked at him for a long moment, thought. Who is this man? Who talks horses into cooperating? Who writes precise testimony in architectural handwriting? Who sends messages about mountain passes and water haulers before the hearing? Because he thought about what might happen next. Who waits until she eats first every time? So he knows whether there was enough. You, she said. Yes, he said. You're very. She stopped. What? Organized, she said. He looked at her. That is what you were going to say. Yes, she said. He held her gaze. The actual smile had dialed back but not disappeared. Marin, he said. We have work to do, she said. Yes, he said, we do. In those 2 weeks, Greystone Ridge became something it hadn't been in a long time. Bussy. Not with strangers or threat or men coming through gates they hadn't been invited through. With people who had apparently been paying more attention than she'd known. Garrow came on the 3rd day to make his official maintenance observation and stayed 2 hours, helping clear the irrigation channel that had been blocked since July. He didn't explain why he stayed. She didn't ask. Old Delaney came on the 5th day and drove his wagon up the ridge road like he'd done it 100 times, because he had. He sat on the porch and told her, in the flat, exact terms of a man who dealt in distances and volumes, exactly how many times he'd seen her in the fields over 11 years. Most folks wouldn't have counted, she said. Most folks don't haul water past the same ridge every season, he said. When you see the same woman doing the same work for 11 years, you count. He drank his coffee. It's a math thing. He looked like a man who had refused to leave and built a life from what remained. A man who understood the arithmetic of staying. Thank you for coming, she said. Had to, he said simply. It would bother me if the numbers came out wrong. Mrs. Fitch came on the 8th day, with bread, with her ledger copy, and with 2 years of her own personal journals from her time as Birch's bookkeeper, which she had decided were relevant. They were relevant, they were. Marin discovered, over 3 hours at the kitchen table, a nearly complete record of how Birch had built his land operation, dating back to when Mrs. Fitch had first suspected something was wrong and begun keeping private notes. You kept journals, Marin said. I keep journals about everything, Mrs. Fitch said. Since 1851. It is extremely useful. She left the journals, just left them, the way you leave groceries. Marin sat with them for the rest of the evening and tried not to think too hard about what it meant. That an old woman had been keeping this record for years, waiting for someone to finally stand in front of Birch and need exactly this. Silas Graybear came on the 9th day, not for the case. For his brother, she brought 2 cups of coffee to the porch, then went back and brought a 3rd. He looked at the 3 cups. You give water, he said. I have coffee, she said. Not quite the same. Intention is the same, he said. The vessel changes. They sat. Dakota was at the barn. She could hear him talking to Biscuit, which had become inexplicably a normal thing that she had accepted as part of her life. He has been alone a long time, Silas said. Not to her exactly. More to the space between them. Our mother's death made him careful. He stopped allowing himself to assume that places were permanent. That people were permanent. He paused. He scouts because it gives him a reason to move. It is very hard to lose something you have not allowed yourself to keep. She held that thought. I understand that. From the other direction, the person who stayed in one place and let herself be managed around rather than genuinely with. She said nothing of this to Silas. He's talking to Biscuit again, she said. Silas listened. He does that, he said. Does it work? With horses? A pause. Surprisingly often. The 2nd hearing was on a Thursday. She wore the same dress. Not sentiment. It was clean and fit, and the one she wasn't wearing was being saved for an actual celebration, rather than a legal proceeding of uncertain outcome. They rode in at 7. She and Dakota and Silas and Culp who had decided he was present at every stage until this was finished, and Mrs. Fitch, who arrived in a wagon, with the journals and the ledger copy, and a basket containing inexplicably a jar of preserves. Marin looked at the basket. In case this takes a while, Mrs. Fitch said. Hatch walked in at 9. He looked at all of them. Then he sat down and read, not from his ruling but from Marin's original filing, the one she'd written on the road, the section on 11 years of continuous property maintenance. He read it out loud. Flat, exact, the voice of a man reading a legal document. But the words were hers and they were accurate. And hearing them read in a room, with witnesses, gave them a weight they hadn't had when she'd written them, alone, on the road, with the shale shifting under the wheels. He set it down. He read the adverse possession addendum from the statute. The one she'd found on day 11 of the 2-week, wait in a legal compendium she'd borrowed through Theodore, who had apparently done many quiet things for many people who needed help and never made anything of it. He folded his hands. Mrs. Wolfe, Judge. 11 years, he said. Yes, without interruption. Without interruption. Through 2 droughts. 3, she said. The third one was minor. But it counted. Something moved in his face. The adverse possession statute requires 10 years of open, notorious, continuous, and exclusive use. He paused. You have 11. Your witnesses corroborate. The property records corroborate. He looked at Alderton. The standing question resolves in favor of the petitioner. Alderton started to speak. Furthermore, Hatch said with the specific tone of a man who has decided what he's going to say and is going to finish it. The conditional transfer agreement contains a fulfillment clause. Satisfied by documented delivery of harvest, proceeds across 3 consecutive years as evidenced by 2 independent ledger records now in court custody. The conditional transfer was discharged. The transfer activation filed by Mr. Birch is therefore invalid. He looked at Alderton. Your client has no claim on Greystone Ridge. Legal or equitable, the room was very quiet. He signed the ruling, stamped it, handed it to the clerk. He looked at Marin. She looked back. Thank you, she said. He took his glasses off. Mrs. Wolfe, he said, I've been doing this work for 30 years. I have ruled correctly and incorrectly and in ways I knew were wrong because the system made it easier than fighting it. He paused. I'm not interested in the ones I got right. I'm interested in not adding to the other list. He put his glasses back on. Today I did not add to the other list. She nodded. Neither did you, he said. You brought me a clean case. You did the work. You found the witnesses. A pause. The land is yours. It was always yours. Now the paperwork matches. He stood. Everyone stood. He walked out. Alderton gathered his documents without speaking. He looked at Marin once. Not with hostility, not with admiration. With the expression of a man who has done his job and lost and is already thinking about the next one. My client will likely appeal, he said. He's welcome to, she said. A pause. For what it's worth, he said quietly. I didn't know about the ledger alterations when I took this case. She looked at him. The particular tired look of someone who has just discovered the floor of a case he thought was solid. She believed him. Find better clients, she said. He picked up his case and left. Outside the street in Harrow's Creek held the afternoon light at its late angle, the kind that found color in dry things. The dust was gold. The limestone buildings were warm. A bird moved high above, slow circles on the thermal, not hurrying, surveying, not a buzzard, a hawk. She watched it for a moment, felt the signed ruling in the satchel. The weight of it. 11 years and 3 droughts and 1 dead husband and 1 amended ledger, and 1 very opinionated horse and a water stone in her pocket, and 2 cups on a porch table every morning. All of it. Adding up to this. To standing on a sidewalk in Harrow's Creek with ruled paperwork and a hawk overhead, and the feeling of something past relief. Something on the other side of a thing you've been carrying so long that setting it down feels like learning to use your hands for a different purpose. Marin, she turned to Coda, looking at her with that full attention. The kind that gave the moment its proper weight. We're losing afternoon, he said. Yes, she said. She didn't move immediately. He waited. After we get back, she said. The irrigation channel Garrow helped clear. I want to extend it to the south field, and I want to talk to Delaney about the water hauling route, whether it could reach the families on the east side of the valley who've been without a reliable source all summer. He was quiet for a moment. That's two separate projects, he said. I know. The channel alone is a month's work. I know that too. He looked at her. You're already somewhere else. I'm always planning the next thing, she said. The next thing is how you stay on a ridge. He nodded, slowly. I know the soil gradient on the south field, he said. It should run east-southeast to pick up the natural draw. She looked at him. You've been thinking about this since the first fence post, she said. I scout terrain, he said. It's what I do. She looked at him for a long moment, thought. This man walked into a barn and healed, and fixed a fence, and talked to a horse, and wrote 5 pages of precise testimony, and sent messages about mountain passes, and thought about irrigation gradients for a ridge he had no stake in, who waited until she ate first, every day, so he'd know whether there was enough. South-southeast, she said. Yes, he said. You can show me the grade when we get back. Yes, they went to get the horses. The road home was the same road, except it wasn't. Same shale, same creek crossings, same opinionated horse who had opinions about hills. But a road you take going toward something is different from one you take going away. And a road you've traveled twice, with the one beside you, is different from the one you first traveled alone. She thought about the morning she found him. The pile of something behind the west outcrop. The decision she'd made without quite deciding it. The last water in the canteen, she thought. If I had gone back the other way. If Biscuit had run east instead of west. She did not do that for long. The if not this line of thinking was a drain with no bottom. She'd learned that. What happened, happened, and it had led to here, to a ruled document in a satchel, and 2 people on the road toward Greystone Ridge, with enough work ahead of them to keep them occupied for years. The word arrived with the force of something she hadn't quite looked at directly until this moment. Not days, not the next problem. Years, she thought about what Silas had said. That Dakota didn't let himself keep things because it was too hard to lose them. She thought about what it would mean to be kept. To be the kind of thing someone stopped bracing against losing because they'd decided to stay. She thought about 2 cups on a porch table, about a fence post set correctly in dry earth. She thought, real things don't need to be announced. They just need to be true. This felt true. They reached the ridge as the light went amber. That particular last light of a late summer afternoon that found the color in everything it touched. Dry grass going gold. The limestone canyon walls warm. Well's shadow stretching east. She stopped at the gate, looked at it. All of it, her land, which it had been for 11 years and which a piece of paper now confirmed, and which was, yes, the same and also different. Like Mrs. Fitch's bread was bread, whether or not you were handed it, but being handed it mattered. The bread didn't change. But being handed it mattered. She reached into her pocket, the waterstone, the carved cup. Smooth from weeks of being touched, warm from her body, she walked to the well. She put her hands on the handle and cranked. The bucket came up. Clean water, more than she'd gotten in 3 months. The cold and mineral and deep, the smell of something that had been underground for a long time. Patient waiting, she filled the canteen. She filled a second one. She walked back to where Dakota was standing by the horses. She held one out to him. He looked at it. He looked at her. Water, he said. Yes, she said. Clean. From the well, a pause. The well is recovering, he said. Seems like it, she said. He took the canteen, looked at it for a moment, the weight of it in his hand. Marin, he said. Dakota, she said. They looked at each other for a long time, in the amber light, with the horses shifting behind them, and the land settling into evening, and 11 years of one woman's work, and 3 generations of another people's memory in the ground, underneath. No ceremony. Nothing that would need to be taken back or re-examined in a quieter moment. Just 2 people on a ridge with water. Which was where everything had started. And which was, she was beginning to understand, where everything that actually mattered always started, small, and sufficient, and real. He drank. She drank. They turned toward the house. Birch appealed. She had expected that. His lawyers filed in the territorial court, and Hatch sent a letter saying the review was routine, and he was not concerned. She was working, which for her was the same as not being concerned. The channel extension took 6 weeks. Because they did it right, every foot graded, every junction checked twice, every section allowed to settle before they moved to the next. Dakota was patient in a way she found both admirable and occasionally maddening. He would look at a section she thought was done and say, "Not yet." He was always right. She acknowledged this, verbally, on at least 3 occasions, which was more acknowledgement than she had offered most. Most things in her adult life, Delaney adjusted his water route, not because anyone required it, because she explained the aquifer to him over coffee, and he looked at the map she'd drawn and said, 2 weeks later, a message arrived saying he'd spoken to 4 families on the East Valley Hayes side, and they were interested in a shared access arrangement. The arrangement took 3 meetings. But the families came to talk, which meant people coming to Greystone Ridge in a way that wasn't to judge or assess the strange, tall widow who had made her strange choices. Just people coming. The first time a woman named Augusta Hendricks sat on the porch and talked about the East Field drought problems, like it was a normal thing to do, Marin sat very still for a moment. She could pinpoint when this had started. The morning Silas Graybear stood at her gate and said, "You are in our record now." The morning things started being recorded as they actually were. The appeal was denied in October. 4 paragraphs. The territorial court declining to overturn, she read it at the kitchen table. Read it again, put it in the satchel, went outside. Dakota was at the South Channel, checking the last section. She could see him from the porch, crouched at the waterline, watching the flow. She walked out, he heard her coming and looked up. She held out the letter without speaking. He read it, set it down on the dry ground beside him. "Done," he said. "Done," she said. The channel moved between them, clean and quiet the way the best things were. "The South Field," she said. "If we get rain this winter, we will," he said. "You don't know that." "The sky has been different for 2 weeks," he said. "Silas says the season pattern is shifting." "It will rain," she looked at the sky. It was different. She'd noticed it and not quite said so. "If it rains," she said. "I want to try wheat in the South Field in spring. Proper wheat. The kind that takes a full season." He looked at the field. "The soil needs amendment," he said. "I know. 2 months of work before planting. I know that too." He looked at her. "You're always planning the next thing," he said. "You keep saying that like it's a criticism." She said, "It's not." He said, "I was going to say, so am I." She looked at him. He had the waterstone in his hand, the carved cup she'd given back to him a week ago. She'd simply held it out and said, "Keep it." He hadn't asked why. He'd put it on the cord with his other stones. 2 months of soil amendment, she said, "and the fence on the north edge." He said, "That fence is fine. The 3rd post from the corner is going to fail before spring. It looks fine," he said. "It's not fine. The rot is under the surface. In spring, when the water table rises, it will accelerate." He was right. He was almost always right about the land. She had started to accept this as a fact rather than a challenge. He had grown up reading terrain. The land spoke to him in a language he'd been taught to hear. She was learning it, not quickly, not easily, but learning. She looked at the fence line, at the ridge beyond it, at the sky. 11 years alone on this land. 11 years of carrying the whole weight of it by herself, because that was what was necessary, and she was capable, and there was no one else. And now, not alone, not a named thing yet, not a ceremony or declaration, just not alone, in the way of 2 people who had organized themselves around shared work until the organization was the relationship. Until the 2 cups and the second blanket and the 2 months of soil amendment planned together were all the same thing, named or not. She looked at him. He was looking at the fence post. "Dakota," she said. He looked up. "I want you to stay," she said. "Not to fix the fence. Not because you owe me anything." She held his eyes. "Because what we've been doing here is the most real thing I've done in 11 years, and I don't want to stop doing it." He looked at her. A long moment. The sky was that particular blue of late afternoon, with rain beginning to think about itself. The channel moved behind them. Biscuit, somewhere in the barn, had found something to comment on. "You're asking me to stay," he said. "Yes, not as a guest, no, not as a hired hand." Another pause. "Not as someone you owe a debt to," he said. "I've never felt that way," she said. Not once. He looked at the waterstone on his cord, at the fence post, at the channel, at the ridge under the changing sky. "My counsel work," he said. "I would need to continue it. Silas and I have cases unfinished. That would take me away, regularly." "I know," she said. "That's your work. It matters. You wouldn't?" "No," she said. "I would manage. I've been managing." "You would manage," he agreed. With the quality of instating a fact he found both obvious and something else. Something warmer than obvious. "So," she said. He looked at her. Not the measuring look. Not the careful assessment. Something that had always been underneath the measurement, but that she was seeing directly now, without the surface over it. "Yes," he said. Syllable. One word. The way he answered everything that mattered. She breathed, thought, "All right. That's done." "Good," she said. "Yes," he said a moment, then she said. "The fence post." "Tomorrow," he said. "Today," she said. "It's almost dark. There's still light." He looked at the sky. "The last amber of it at the edges. There's 20 minutes," he said. "That's enough for a fence post," she said. "It is not enough for a fence post. It's enough to start one." A pause. "You always have to be doing the next thing," he said. "Yes," she said. "Are you going to help or not?" He picked up the post driver. She went for the replacement timber, and above Greystone Ridge. In the amber, last light of a Thursday in October, the sky did what Dakota had said it would do. It began to close in the way it did before rain. Slow, deliberate, certain of itself. The first drop hit the dry ground while she was carrying the timber back. She stopped, felt it, one drop, then another, then three at once. Then the sky opened, not a gentle rain, a real one. The kind the land had been waiting for since July. The kind that soaked in immediately because the earth was so dry. It simply took and took without running, drinking before it could overflow. Cold and clean and smelling of everything the summer had promised and delayed, and finally delivered. She stood in it. Biscuit, from the barn, made his opinion of this development very clearly known. She laughed. Out loud. In the rain. With the fence post driver in her hand, and timber on her shoulder, and the signed ruling on the kitchen table, and 11 years of a life that had finally added up to something she was willing to call hers. Because the horse. Because 11 years. Because the fence post, and the channel, and the wheat she was going to plant in spring. Because a carved stone cup in a pocket, and canteens filled from a well that was coming back. Because a judge in Harrow's Creek who didn't want to add to the wrong list. Because a man who talked to horses and kept independent records, and sat at gates without opening them, and waited for her to eat first every single morning. So he'd know whether there was enough ums, because sometimes, not always, not easily, not without fighting for it. The water came. She stood in until Dakota said, "I know," she said. "We should get it inside." "I know that too." She turned around. He was standing in the rain with the post driver, and the expression of a man who had accepted that he was going to be wet now, and had decided this was fine. She picked up the timber. He held the barn door. They went inside. That spring she planted wheat in the south field, 2 months of soil amendment. A winter of proper rain, the kind that recharged things, rather than just wetting the surface. A spring that arrived correctly for once. Without tricks, the wheat came up in late April. Even rose, actually green. Against the dry gold of the ridge, it looked like something the land had been holding in reserve, waiting for the conditions to be right. She stood at the field edge in the morning and looked at it. Dakota came to stand beside her. Neither of them spoke, they just looked at it together. The thing you tend long enough, the thing that comes back when you give it water and time and the patience to believe it will. She put her hand in her pocket, the waterstone, the carved cup, open at the top, ready. She thought about a morning in July, with a canteen almost empty, and a decision she made. Before she'd decided it, she thought about a woman who left water on a rock for no one she knew because someone asked her to, because it seemed like the kind of thing that might matter to whoever needed it. She thought about Silas at the gate, about Culp's flagged ledger pages, about Mrs. Fitch's 20 years of journals, about Garrow stepping off the fence, about Delaney who refused to leave and built something from what remained, about all the small things, all the cup-sized things, which were not, she understood now, small at all. They were the whole of it, the cup, the water, the giving without calculating the cost first, the decision, made in the early morning before anyone was watching, to be the kind of person who crouched down beside something dying and offered what little she had left. That was the story. All of it. Every document and hearing Post and Wheatfield grew from that one morning. From a woman too large for most rooms, too stubborn to leave, too honest to walk past someone who needed water, from a tin cup, almost empty. Given freely. And everything that followed end.